of Delhi. It's quite warm and yeah, not very pleasant right now. I think Rituparna is in Delhi. She'll be able to tell you better. How is it at your place?
It's when I left the house today, it was 37 degrees. So it's cold.
It's cold.
Yeah, it's
centigrades.
Yeah,
no, Fahrenheit.
No, centigrade.
Centigrade?
Quite
Centigrade. Wow, here in Ahmedabad is 41.
41.
41.
Yeah, Hyderabad is, Ahmedabad is quite warm.
No, I'm Fahrenheit then. It would have been like, maybe in the 20s or 15s.
Ines has also joined us.
I know. How are you? So nice to see you.
So Rosa, we'll do as we agreed. We'll just do we'll share the first two.
The first, start,
Yeah.
and then you continue.
Yeah.
Ines.
Hi, Ines.
Hi, Rosa. Hi, Lina. How are you? Hi, Deepali. Nice to meet you.
Yes, nice to meet you.
Ines,
I hope that internet connection doesn't fail. I'm at home and sometimes there are problems. I hope it won't fail. Hi, Sreeparna.
Hi, Rosa. Hi, Lina.
কেমন আছো?
ভালো আছি। আপনি কেমন?
মোটামুটি।
Don't speak secret languages. It's not fair.
Sorry.
Hi,
Hello.
Bernadette. How are you?
All right, thanks. Are you yourself doing well?
Yes, I am. And you? I'm still jet lagged, but.
Oh, you've been to India?
Yes.
Oh, okay. All right, okay. Yeah, so between two worlds. Floating. How was it? How was India?
Well, so far, I arrived on Sunday early morning. So far, it's wonderful, even though it's very hot. It's 40 during the day, 41, dry weather.
Yeah.
It's so nice to be back after 2 years or more than 2 years.
Yeah. Oh, okay. No issues then of any sort.
No. I feel safe and happy here and protected.
Okay, well, that's the main thing then.
Yeah.
All right, okay. Well, we'll catch up on that sometimes, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
Ritu, where are you?
Is it just 3 people?
Ritu, hi Ritu.
Hi everyone. I'm in Delhi and it's very hot.
Very hot.
Sorry, I was behind the background handling the live stream, so I couldn't contribute to the discussion.
But we've been going through an unseasonal heat wave. It's not normal to have such high temperatures anywhere in India right now.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's spring, it's officially spring. So I live in a place called Pune, which is in Western India, which is supposed to have pretty good weather. And we've also seen late 30s, almost touching 40-degree days, which is very, very unusual for this time of the year. So
even here is quite unusual. Apparently, shift from winter to summer or spring to summer from one day to the other.
Yeah, everyone who says climate change is not real really needs to come and live here for a bit.
Only Trump would say that.
Okay, we leave politics out. I still live here. It's true though.
Hi Ines, I've read your paper but haven't had the chance to meet you before.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
We should have met in Lisbon, or all of us in India.
We have to meet in Lisbon, all of us.
Yeah, in the summer maybe.
There.
Yeah.
I think we can begin in about a minute or two.
Whenever you feel like, yeah.
Just to let everyone know, we'll record the meeting and then it'll be uploaded on our Facebook page as well as in the blog. So even if people don't watch it now, they can catch up with it later.
Okay.
And also it is being live streamed on our YouTube channel.
Hi, Akos.
Sakush, I haven't seen him.
Hi, Akos, how are you?
Hi, Akush.
Unmute
Yes,
yourself. Yes, yes, nice to see you all. And I'm all ready because of my workout.
Leonora, ciao.
Hi, João.
Hi everyone. Hi Akash, hi Lina.
Yes.
Douglas.
Betty, how are you? My first PhD student. There she is, Betty Harris, Professor Harris.
Oh.
Well,
Hi,
very-
hi, Lena and
Oh,
everyone.
hi,
Nice to
Betty.
be here. Hi, Akash.
You're looking good. Very, yes, I like it.
Thank you.
I like all the braids. Beautiful.
My COVID hairdo.
Wow.
Okay.
Right. Lena is in her office. Yes. God.
That all hang
this
in
time
Rosa. Remember,
it's-
we bought it together
Oh, yes.
in Gujarat.
In Gujarat.
Oh, yes, yes.
But you know,
Behind me.
this place, I mean, these law gardens changed so much. But in Kutch, you still have beautiful fabrics like this.
Oh, yes. Yes.
I'll buy you
Yes,
one. I'll buy you one.
It's so good to see you all.
Pali, shall we?
Yes. So I think we'll just begin with our discussion. So we're starting with the recording now. Hi, everyone. I welcome you on behalf of Doing Sociology. I welcome all of you to a book discussion on transdisciplinary ethnography in India, Women in the Field, edited by Rosa Perez and Lina M. Fruzzetti, which has been published by Routledge as part of their Contemporary South Asia series in 2021. Before I introduce the book, I would like to tell our participants a little bit about Doing Sociology. We are an independent, non-funded, women-led blog from India. And we started small with 3 of us probably sitting in our rooms during the pandemic. But with the idea of creating an online platform or online resource for scholars, particularly in India, who do not have access to quality academic works or publications. So, and also to create a platform where we can have dialogue between the global North as well as the global South. So you can check out our website at www.doingsociology.org. We also have a Facebook page and a Twitter handle, YouTube channel as well, where today's discussion is being live streamed as well. So that is about us. A little bit about the book. This book familiarizes readers with a new way to treat the subject of gender, foregrounding the real voices of women, their experiences doing ethnographic work, and their courage in sharing their stories publicly for the first time in the context of India. A useful companion to more theory-based anthropological studies, the book connects ethnographic data to what eventually becomes theories formed from the field. Chapters by women from a variety of disciplines, including anthropology, literary and translation studies, political sciences, transcend the academic boundaries between social sciences and humanities. The book shows how the researchers navigate the field, write in ways that defy their academic life and work, and call into question their narrative voices. The book also presents a space for women to reflect on their individual themes of research and at partially filling the vacuum mentioned above, the silences of women's voices and expressions. The experiences described in the chapters differ both along the divide of a native and a non-native field worker and along different disciplinary fields, but they share the experience of a long-term fieldwork in India and the need to self-reflect on the impact of this experience on the way the field is represented, on the people encountered in the field, and on the way the field impacted the field worker. So the book is a useful presentation of how female researchers act in the field as women and as scholars. It fills a gap in the existing literature of ethnographic research methods. And the book will be of interest to students and researchers who are working within the fields of gender studies, social work, sociology, anthropology, and Asian studies. And for our book discussion, we have both the editors of the book, Professor Rosa Perez and Professor Lina Fruzzetti. We also have Dr. Sreeparna Chattopadhyay and Dr. Ines Lourenco who have been contributors to the book. I'm sure our speakers today need no introduction, but I would still go ahead and do it very briefly. So Lina Fruzzetti joined the anthropology department at Brown University in 1975. She holds several national and international appointments and has taught at the universities of Khartoum, Dar es Salaam, University of Helsinki, ISCTE Lisbon, and at IIT Gandhinagar, Ahmedabad. She directed the South Asian Studies undergraduate major. She has served on numerous university governance committees and national committees, Fulbright, ACLS, Woodrow Wilson Foundation. Her primary focus is social anthropology is on kinship, ritual, and the construction of gender, race, and ethnic relations, as well as ethnographic film. She conducts research in 2 world regions, India and Northeast Africa. She's the co-editor of the book, Transdisciplinary Ethnography in India, Women in the Field. Rosa Perez, who's also the co-editor of the book. She is currently a visiting professor at the Indian Institute of Technology, Gandhinagar, and a senior researcher at the Center for Research in Anthropology, University of Lisbon Institute. And until 2020, she was a professor of the Department of Anthropology of ISCTE, University Institute of Lisbon. She has been a visiting professor at different universities in the US, Europe, Mozambique, Brazil, and India. Her core research is on Indian society and social segregation, women's studies, colonialism, post-colonialism. And she's the consultant to the UN Commission for Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment and European Councils on Asia. And we have with us Sreeparna Chattopadhyay, who is an associate professor of sociology at Flame University, Pune. Her research in the last 15 years has focused on the ways in which gender disadvantages interact with socioeconomic inequities, shaping women's life trajectories, including impacts on health, education, and exposure to violence. Her work has been supported by the Harry Frank Guggenheim Foundation, the National Science Foundation, the Mellon Foundation, and the Vera Campbell Foundation. Her research has been published in several international and national journals and has also been covered by the national press in India as well as internationally by the BBC. She's worked for the government, academia, and non-profits in India, the US, as well as the UK. Her first book, The Gravity of Hope on Domestic and Structural Violence, will be published in 2022. And finally, we have Ines Lourenco, who's a researcher at the Center for Research in Anthropology, CRIA-ISCTE, of which she's also a member of the board. Her current research addresses the migrant heritage of communities of Indian origin in Portugal. This includes Gujarati Hindus and Muslims, Goan Catholics, and Punjabi Sikhs. She taught anthropology of India at ISCTE, University of Lisbon, and currently she is an invited assistant professor at Nova University of Lisbon. So I welcome all of you to today's discussion. Very happy to have 4 of you with us today, and I welcome all our participants who've taken time out to join us for today's book discussion. So now over to you, Sreeparna, to take forward today's discussion.
Thank you so much, Dipali, and thank you to our speakers who are here. We will begin with a question to our editors. I want to know from both of you that in the introduction to this fascinating volume, you have used a quote from Peggy Gould, which sort of reads that I do not intend that you search for the sensational or the exotic. On the contrary, it is my belief that a realist description of the trivia of daily living can give an intimate picture of the process of adjustment to another culture and simultaneously a sense of the characteristic profile of that culture. Could you tell us how this idea resonates with your initiative of putting this volume together?
Okay, shall I start, Lina?
Yes.
Okay. So, well, first of all, thank you so much for organizing this book launch. I am delighted to launch the book at the Indian Institute of Technology in Gandhinagar, where indeed it all began. Indeed, when Lina, Akos, and myself were visiting professors here some years ago, Lina and I organized a workshop which we called Women in the Field. And the challenge of their workshop is to an extent the challenge of the book itself. So you start by mentioning Peggy Gould and the fact that our book begins with this citation. And indeed, one question that can be asked is why we start the book on women's experiences in the field with a quotation written more than 40 years ago. Well, as we all know, fieldwork as the essential constituting experience of anthropology has been the object of different and very different deconstructions, not only of the discipline, but also of the anthropologist or himself. Yet, women's experiences as constitutive of the ethnographic knowledge have, to us, largely been neglected. Peggy Gould's citation constitutes for Lina and I a kind of invitation to our colleagues, women colleagues, to focus on the significance of their attempts to enter a network of relationship with Indian women that would shape epistemological, ethical, and political matters. So empathy, rapport, participation, confidences, narratives, dialogues, field notes, diaries are terms and modes that contain and express these relationships, even though we are aware that none of them can capture the complexity of life in the field. This has been a critical challenge put forward to our collaborators, but not only to our collaborators, to us ourselves as well, Lina and I, because as you may guess, we have many debates. Well, first of all over the years, and it has been an enormous privilege to have Lina as a colleague and a very dear friend. So these debates started long before we put this book together, even before we start collaborating in teaching and writing together. So another aspect that we'd like to underscore is that we don't consider ethnography as an homogenizing monologue, not just a matter of a dialogic learning process between the researcher and her interlocutors. We hoped that with this invitation, we could go beyond disparate voices to some understanding of the social structures and cultures that were made, reproduced, and changed by women who lived with them. In the broadest sense, the chapters of this volume aimed at a change of direction in quote-unquote classical ethnography or fieldwork, even knowing, to borrow Ruth Bear's inspired expression, that we will always be vulnerable observers. And in that sense, we are open to new encounters with women in the field. And one of, indeed, the invitations with which we end the book is exactly to other colleagues, other scholars, other women or men to continue this, this endeavor to work with not only with women, but to, and I will develop it more later on when talking about collaborative anthropology, of having them at the center of the ethnographic methodology and epistemology. And Lina, shall I give you the floor now?
Okay, I will I'll just briefly, first of all, to thank both Dipali, the organizers, and Ritu, but also to thank Rosa, with whom I worked for a long time, and we're still friends, so we haven't started to see problems with each other, none at all. And we were able to get this work done, and we still have many other things in the works. But since time is short and we each have 5 minutes to share for each questions, I wanted to just say that when we sent the invitation out, it was a clear message. We were looking for experiences. We're looking for ideas from the contributors who also spent time in India doing fieldwork. We realized that since 1970, there hasn't been a book that really addressed the question of fieldwork and all the hardship with fieldwork with women working in India. So when we say underscoring the description of the trivia of daily living, it is exactly what we were looking for, to share the complete and the silences of women's experiences that was really not written in text, nor where they discuss or found in libraries. So many of us had not shared our difficulties, our difficult moments in doing fieldwork in India. So we agreed to open up, lay ourselves bare, and expose ourselves to the challenges that we encountered as women workers, as women scholars, and to reveal our most intimate thoughts, experiences, proficiencies, sharing those zones of vulnerabilities that we ignore to really address in our multiple sort of publication of texts and so on. So the question is whether this text, this book, this edited volume really tells the story, and is it really as important a companion to sort of Peggy Gould's 1970. So I will continue with the second question, Dipali.
Right. So the second question that we have is that, the book also focuses on autoethnography, an approach and method which is often debated. So could you take us through the debates and how you enter it through this volume?
So Rosa, shall I start this?
Yes.
Okay. So we use autoethnography as a way to allow the self to speak about what I individually go through these daily experiences in the field, our thoughts, our understanding of what really we encounter and how it hits us, how we endured it, how we tolerated it. So those kinds of experiences in the field are really it's part of the self, it's how I respond to it. I can't let somebody else speak for myself. And I do in my chapter on how I encountered fieldwork, I will explain some of the things that perhaps other women didn't really share the same kinds of experiences. We're all different. and we all sort of see the field differently. So we were looking at how many of these encounters have impacted on us, on me as a person, as an individual, as an anthropologist, and how do I respond to the unfamiliar, to the difficulty, to the challenges that we sort of see on the field. So basically, it's about putting ourselves in the midst of the unfamiliar, initial unfamiliar, the difficulties of existence in an atmosphere that seems to be okay and easygoing, but in fact, we begin to see and conceptualize some of the difficulties that also embed the community that we are working with. So what my eye sees, what I experience as a person is for me to actually lay it out in the chapter when we talk about our own individuality and so forth. So putting oneself in the midst of all of these is basically to open up, and as much as we can individually, in what is it that we try to ignore in our monographs. We've each written a few texts so far, but what is it that we ignore to allow to be written in those texts, for example, and what is it that now we are doing so, rejuvenated experiences that might have been difficult for us when we were in the field at the time. So these much sort of reactions, as we wanted to ignore them, are now laid out in each of our chapters. It really addresses, each individual will address and recall and express those thoughts, those ideas, those fears, those excitement, those ups and downs, those high and lows. No one can speak for myself. I will speak for myself. So each of us reacted differently, and our chapters basically tell the story of what went on in our heads and how we dealt with the difficulties that we experienced. And that's how we meant by using the autoethnography. And it's different from writing memoirs. It's totally different. Rosa.
Yes, well, both of us indeed asked that question. Can this be considered autoethnography, or, as Lina just mentioned, can it be considered a biography or autobiography, a memoir, and so forth and so forth? And I do believe that Lina has been very explicit at explaining why we use the autoethnography as one approach to our work with women, our reflections in the field. We are aware that many criticisms have been raised against autoethnography, even though it has for us many possibilities. It has the potential to give a silence group to enunciate from its own location and according to its own agenda, its vision of itself and of the world. And all of us, in a way or another, have done so far with the group of women. Of course, we are aware that, as I mentioned, some criticisms have been raised against autoethnography, mainly the possibility of it involving us in forms of essentialism or identity politics that we believe that we had overcome long ago. Well, it's not a defense, but I think that going through the book, through the different chapters, it will be quite clear that different authors with different experiences indeed have showed how autoethnography can indeed solve different dilemmas that ethnography has created, both regarding the observer and her interlocutors.
Thank you, Professor Perez and Professor Fruzzetti, for those interesting answers. Now I have a question for Dr. Chattopadhyay. You know, in your chapter, you deal with something very interesting, the complexity of emotional responses to data. So we would be very interested in knowing what you mean by that, and if you could talk more about it.
Thank you, Ritu and Deepali, for organizing this panel. My chapter is called Witnessing Vulnerability and the Vulnerable Witness, Gendering Emotions in Fieldwork. So this chapter was written several years after I conducted fieldwork. And I think in some sense that distance was necessary for two reasons. One is, like I like to tell, when I teach research methods, that sometimes you need to let the data marinate for a while before you can respond to it, especially in qualitative research. And the second thing is that, my life experiences were very limited when I started off doing fieldwork. In my dissertation fieldwork, I was only 23 when I started doing my PhD fieldwork. So that sort of narrowed down the scope of interpretation. But having lived life and having gone through some traumatic events myself, I was able to reflect back on the data very differently. So I think that, we don't pay adequate attention to how we respond to different types of data. And I'm trained as an anthropologist, but I also have a minor in demography. So I do quantitative research as well as qualitative research and ethnographic research. And for my PhD fieldwork, I undertook both archival research, three kinds of methods really: archival research in the City Civil and Sessions Court in Bombay. My PhD topic was on domestic violence, as well as analysis of quantitative data from the National Family and Health Survey, which is a nationally representative survey that has been done periodically for the last 5 years, and ethnographic fieldwork for nearly a year in an informal settlement in Bombay. So even as I was collecting the data, as I was going through the analysis at the time and even later, I noticed that, each set of data evokes a very different response in us, and we don't really talk about it enough as researchers. So for instance, I just want to read, a paragraph from my field notes, because this explains how I responded to archival data. When I set out to do fieldwork on domestic violence, I had steeled myself mentally to not get carried away by emotions, to retain my, quote, objectivity as a researcher, to not get too emotionally attached with my respondents, to not impose my ideas of Western feminist beliefs on them, and most importantly, never to do anything that would endanger the lives of the women. Working in the slum was easy compared to the things I'm dealing with in the Sessions Court in Bombay. The slum had real women with real problems, and I was witness to many incidents and the information that made me feel pretty low at times. Yes, I did get depressed at times, but sometimes their resilience and their innovative ways of coping lifted me out of my melancholy. But now I feel as if my research has become a never-ending tunnel of darkness. It is very unsettling to read the last words of a dying woman, to touch her thumb imprint still laced with the oil that was used to set her on fire, to read the autopsy report, to see pictures of her headless body. How can I not feel anything? Perhaps I'm focusing too much on the I, how I feel, what goes through my mind. But is it possible for anyone to see those things and not feel anything? So this was written on the 30th of November in 2005 when I was in the City Civil and Sessions Court. And, I used to maintain a diary which was full of sort of my impressions of, and really my feelings as I was going through, collecting different kinds of data. And then when I started analyzing the quantitative data, I realized that it was possible to detach myself quite a bit from, what was going on, because the numbers do have this impact of numbing you. I'm not saying they're not important or that, that they don't have any say in the world of policy. In fact, they can be very powerful tools. And there's a lot of emphasis now in India on data journalism, where data is being used to tell stories. But it's really, what I find is that it's far easier to, feel a sense of sympathy, to feel a sense of empathy when you're dealing with archival data of the nature that I have, or when you're dealing with ethnographic data. But when you're doing quantitative analysis, the demands are very different. And I think that has to do very much with the epistemology of these three kinds of methods. In ethnographic data, there is an absolute need to immerse yourself in the field, to become an insider. And in quantitative data, the demand is that of objectivity. So even when you're interpreting numbers, you're doing it with certain kind of distance. I also, Lina and Rosa have both been my teachers, and I want to say it was so great. I'm still taking notes as I'm listening to the two of you after so many years, because you have such, insightful things to say even now. And is that to add on to a couple of things that they were saying, that why is there this silence around how women feel and how they process some of these experiences? And I feel it has to do with, the sort of, I would say that, the way we have approached this book, it's not only feminist, it's also feminine. And the masculinist and the more masculine way of approaching data is sort of, I won't call it necessarily theory heavy, because you can be theoretical while doing this, but certainly there is a desire to push out anything that is uncomfortable, that exposes your vulnerability, that has emotions involved in it. So I think that, these two approaches are not just exemplified by the quantitative and the qualitative difference that we see, but even within qualitative and theoretical work, you can see these two approaches quite clearly. So at least, that's how I see I would like to respond to your question, Ritu.
Sreeparna, I would like to come in and maybe ask you this. Is it possible to be both emotional and objective while doing research? And could you elaborate on this from your own experiences?
So I would take this question to you and ask you, what do you mean by being objective? What does objectivity mean to you?
If we look at the textbook definition of what being objective is, you keep aside your emotions or your personal views and biases, right? To put it very simply.
But the thing is, the kind of issues that we work on, right, where the personal is political, you can be rigorous. So I think that one needs to make a distinction, or at least I do certainly in my work, between being rigorous, but still being involved. So the way in which, if I am going to write about domestic violence, I can't not, feel some of the pain and some of, even if I have not experienced that acute level of violence or distress, but how can one write about these things authentically, right? If you are not able to understand and empathize with some of the emotions. So you can still be rigorous, I think, if you triangulate data and use different ways of doing it. So this is not anecdotal. So in my research, for instance, I interviewed 52 women over a year, which is, quite a collection of experiences. But they are not just experiences to me. These are, every individual woman is a story. She's unique. She has something, to teach me, even as a researcher. So I think that having that sort of humility, because what does it mean? I mean, to keep your emotions aside, and why should you even do it? Because if this kind of anthropology, as Ruth Behar says, if it doesn't break your heart, it's really not worth doing it, right? So very recently, because I've continued to work on domestic and sexual violence, I came across this completely mind-numbing paper which uses machine learning and very complicated algorithms to look at how to come to this conclusion, right? That if relationships where domestic violence is present, they have a poor quality. That is their conclusion, which is really not, rocket science. You don't. So now, with a lot of research, at least I see in domestic violence and violence against women, is that the focus has been on how sophisticated your methodology can be. It's almost like a competition to appear clever. But the focus is not on how do we, make changes, or how do we create or write about these, they're not just women or figures or numbers, but really about these people in a way that is authentic, that, inspires people to act upon it. So I think that bit is really important, that anthropology always has had this dimension where even if you are not being an activist anthropologist, but through your writing, the impetus is always to encourage people to act upon it, right? To explain difference, to build empathy. So all of these things, and I think that's lost when you focus overly on being objective, pushing out all of these other things which are also important in, telling the story.
Right. Thank you, Sreeparna. Ines, now we'd like to bring you in to the discussion, and you have conducted transnational fieldwork for a very long period of time, and the chapter in this book, your chapter, talks about the transnational Hindu Gujaratis in 4 countries. So could you just begin by highlighting some of the challenges of doing transnational ethnography, especially as a woman?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dipali and Sreeparna, for the invitation to be part of this panel, which honors me very much. I would like to say also that being part of this book was a pleasure, and for being able to share, and above all, to learn a lot from other women researchers, and particularly from Rosa and Lina, who I know for a long time and who always have been a great inspiration for me. So, answering to your question, first of all, I would like to say that this chapter was written together with Rita Cachado, and it's called A Gendered Field in a Transnational Setting, Portuguese Hindu Gujaratis. So with Rita Cachado, I shared a lot of ethnography, and this is also to say that the 4 countries mentioned in the chapter, they result from our both ethnographies. So in fact, Rita, she was in the all 4 countries, Portugal, India, UK, and Mozambique. And unfortunately, I didn't do any field work in Mozambique. So only 3 countries count for me. But to answer to your question, I started by doing research in Portugal on a Hindu community that had not aroused the interest of other anthropologists. Unlike the most studied groups which lived in informal settlements like shanty towns, this was a middle class community which was more integrated socially. So what was very interesting about it was that the fact that unlike the mentioned poor, slummy neighborhoods, this concentrated people belonging to different castes and different cultural and religious traditions within Gujarat. So my first research for my master thesis revealed that this community organized mostly around religion to consolidate their internal diversity. But I also realized that women held very interesting leadership roles within the community, replacing men and even replacing male priests. So this research in Portugal was consolidated by 2 rounds of fieldwork in India, in Diu, state of Gujarat, where many Portuguese Hindus come from. So I returned, this first fieldwork was during the year of 2002, and then I returned at the end of my PhD in 2007. So during this time, I also did 2 periods of fieldwork in the UK, in Leicester and Wembley areas, where transnational contacts with my interlocutors were obviously connected. So, well, now I still keep in touch with many of them, my interlocutors, and I still follow what's going on as much as possible through social media mainly. So in Portugal, I keep my visits to the field, which also provides me a lot of information about the transformation that this community is going through over the last 20 years. But about the challenges you mentioned, well, during transnational ethnography, doing a transnational ethnography as a woman, well, it reveals strong differences and great adaptations, depending on the context. So although I have made several efforts to adjust in Portugal, in the Portuguese context, the fieldwork experience in India was quite different. In Portugal, I was in my environment, in my country, and despite the needed adaptations that implied certain adjustments to gender roles. But in India, the constraints arising from gender patterns were much more challenging. So Rita and I, we traveled. So as I mentioned, we shared a lot of ethnography. So we traveled together with a family from Portugal who went to their home village in Fudam to marry the youngest daughter. So they took us with them, which was very generous from them. And we lived with them for 5 weeks. At that time, in 2002, we were young and single. So we felt very, very strongly the weight of patriarchal structure as we were adopted by the family, which implied that we were also protected as young women family members. And being adopted by the family restricted us to domestic sphere and prevented us to moving around freely, to doing ethnographic collection, to conduct interviews in the village, for instance. So traveling was always done with the family as a family to do shopping or make visits to family relatives. So our fieldwork was conditioned by these circumstances. Well, the lack of privacy was also a challenge. Since domestic place was shared by several family members, as you can imagine, the room where we slept was shared by several women. So you can imagine how difficult it was for us to write a field diary, a field journal. So faced with this situation, it was obvious to us that we had to keep the dominant gender roles. With many of our tasks being washing dishes, prepare food, sweep the floor, or draw water from the well in early morning. So eventually, during festivities and wedding ceremonies, we were also called upon to take photos and videos. It was like our job. Of course, the situation also turned out to be very interesting from an anthropological perspective, since the proximity it allowed us to the domestic sphere, which we would not have had if it was not for this experience. So considering the particularity of this first stay, we chose to carry a second research period in the same year, by the end of the same year, under totally different conditions. We stayed at the government hotel to ensure that we had our own space, which brought us greater freedom of action, right? The possibility of doing ethnography an independent way. Of course, we still maintain local gender roles in the way we dress, in the way we related to people. And finally, just to compare, my stays in the UK, they were very similar to my experience in Portugal. I stayed with a family which I knew from Portugal. I was very close to them, but it was composed only by women. So they were a widowed mother, a divorced daughter, and their daughter. So for me, I could do freely my research, go wherever I wanted, although often I joined them, their activities as well. So to conclude, I would say that doing transnational fieldwork as a woman implies these constant adaptations, and it conditions a lot the way you do ethnography. It forces you to find new strategies, to find alternatives, and they often go against the initial expectations you had.
Right. Ines, you have also talked about gender playing an important role in how you access the group that you study. So if you could take us through that experience a little bit.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, in fact, my first approach to this community was through men, through the president of Shiva Temple Association at the time, was the first person I met. And then I was introduced to other men. They were mainly older men from Mozambique. Then I met the women and I started to get closer to their group because they were they that permanently organized the religious moments, performed the ceremonies. So I started to be invited by them to take part of these moments. But at the same time, I always noticed that my presence triggered some distrust. And in the beginning, I attributed this mistrust to the fact that I was a stranger to those places, and I insisted to participate in all activities to which they invited me. Until this day, while they were preparing a Havan ritual, because they had no temple, so they had to prepare all items for the rituals. They were preparing also food for Parsad. And I offered to help to carry a container of water. And it was at that point that one of them, she reacted, she prevented me to touch that container. And I walked away, and one of them, she put me aside and tried to explain that I could not participate in these moments, in those moments, and touch sacred things if I was in those days. So from then on, several times, I was warned that I had to comply with this prohibition to enter sacred places during my periods, which I did, of course. So sometimes before entering their houses, a temple, I was asked repeatedly, "Are you clean today?" So I started to take the initiative to inform my interlocutors that I was clean. And as time went by, they stopped asking me that. So that's when I finally won their trust. But it took me some months, okay? So although at the beginning it would seem that being a woman would make it easier for me to relate to my female interlocutors, what happened was the opposite. The fact that I was a woman and that I eventually, in a situation that according to them would contaminate the sacred places. So this inhibited their openness in the beginning to my presence and generated this mistrust among them, and finally functioned for me as a test that I finally passed after much persistence. So on the other hand, my male colleagues crossing the same fieldwork places, they never had to go through this obstacle. So in addition, apart from this initial access obstacle, the fact that I wanted to research among women made it difficult to access the community in a broader way. So I used to participate in all the satsangs. I was invited to chant hymns, bhajans, whatever. I sat with them for hours at their homes and their temples. So I had finally won the ideal position for my ethnography after a stubborn struggle. However, this immersion in women's group ended blocking me from other groups with whom I wanted, of course, to maintain contact, particularly the group of my first hosts, the older men. So first being a Portuguese woman, it was difficult to get into the women's group. But after, because I was part of ladies' group, as I came to be seen, I lost access to men's group. So they hardly spoke to me at some point. So I started again a new approach, trying not to lose the status I had achieved. And I approached men, asking them for interviews and offering them copies of my publications. And over time, I managed to find this balance that I needed, to maintain balanced relations among men and women. So I think this is not about neutrality or objectivity. I think it has become quite obvious that those are impossible to achieve and even problematic. But I think this is rather about a balance between the various actors in the research and between me as a woman and as a researcher and as a person who shares with them their places and their lives over the time.
Thank you, Ines. Professor Fruzzetti, going back to you, I wanted to know from you, how did you navigate the boundaries of the outsiders and the insider in your research in Bengal, since you've extensively worked in that region?
Thank you. And thank you, Sreeparna and Ines. It's so nice to hear comments from both of you. And Rosa and I will do everything for you guys still. So my doing fieldwork in Bengal was slightly different, and I want to go through some of these differences. So, but coming to the field, I had the utmost preparation to actually embark on immediately starting the work. I had acquired the language for 2 years. I had read just about everything there was in the libraries about ritual, kinship, or gender. So I felt extremely confident that of doing research in Bengal. I felt like I am going home. And that was that I didn't see them as being different from me or the other, all the words that we use to differentiate oneself from the interlocutors. I thought I was entering home with people. I shared something fundamentally good and enduring. And that sharedness was my brown skin color, which seemingly was with people that looked like me. Well, during the various journeys in my own life as a refugee in the Sudan, and I was called a stranger, Ajnabiyya, or born in Eritrea of Italian and Eritrean mother. There I was called a Hafsi, and half and half. Or joining Chicago, there at some stage I was referred to as a Black person. And I would say to them, well, look, I do have a tribe. My mother comes from such and such a tribe. But it didn't matter what tribe my mother was, that we were not identified by tribal reckoning in Chicago, but it was by what people saw, and what they saw was a Black person. So once again, I faced new surroundings, new individualities. Unlike life in Africa or in the US, I would experience further differences when I was trying to do sort of research in Bengal. Guided by two ideas, race and displacement. In fact, the question I kept getting asked was clearly going to be a problem for me. So if you're not from any city in India and you're not an Indian, what are you? Well, I had to decide what am I in this context now. Once again, I had to figure out my relationship, how my relationship is going to fare out in amongst the people I'm trying to sort of work with. The what are you had to be resolved quickly, taking time to basically describe my truncated identities that I now face. I was from Africa, a continent not known much by some of the people that I was working with. Bishnupur, the town that we did research in, was actually visited by an all-white American army that camped outside of the town during the Second World War. A few days later, they up and left, and a new American army came, and they were all Black. So that in itself, they told me about that. They said, well, which one do you belong with? Do you belong to the white or to the Black? And it's difficult to have said, I'm actually belong to both white and Black, but not that white and not that Black. So it gave me an idea to sort of describe this segregation that was going on, that actually is defined by or how to describe life in the United States for somebody who is not fully one or fully the other, and what were the implications. It's like I've turned into a kind of historian, trying to describe something, eventually hoping that will help me get across some of the obstacles that I was finding. So Africa posed an interesting curiosity for me, and patiently I tried to minimize its challenges so I could begin my work. I never became the insider like all others doing field work. I was still an outsider. I thought I was the insider because of something that was really constructed in my head, but it meant nothing when I was on the ground. So if society is seen to connect what individuals share with each other, I lacked that kind of connectivity. So I had to remain as the outsider, looking inside a community I'm trying to decipher, trying to understand. So I needed much more time to tie me to them. Thus, I remained an outsider, but I began to work on trust. And once I have established a trust, and especially the second bout of fieldwork, I came with a baby, with a child, with a daughter. And my husband Akash was also doing fieldwork in the same town. my social space between me and them, the community I'm about to understand, was slightly starting to sort of feel a bit more accepting of who I am, which in fact follows, and once I begin to see that I am not quite in the part of the community, but outside it, eventually, slowly, I begin to see that they have drawn me in through some of the rituals that they are doing. If they were doing a ritual about marriage rights and they needed one more person, I could actually fill in the space of that one person if they needed a fifth or a seventh participant. So it took a while for them to actually begin to understand. But one of the interesting questions they always ask me is that my parents must have paid a huge amount of money to be married to somebody who is tall and he is so white. This question of whiteness kept coming up all the time. But why are you so dark? And then I said, no, remember I told you I'm half and half. They said, oh yeah, okay. So there was this question of race that I'm trying to just ignore because I wanted to start working on what I thought was important for me. Later on, it started to dawn that perhaps this is also something for me to think about, how others accept you or not. And it became part of my own reckoning of how I see myself in situations and how I begin to see how others define me. You know, and it's what Johannes Fabian said, in the field, we begin to understand ourselves a lot more than if we had not left the comfort of our houses and gone to do fieldwork somewhere else, totally different from one's own. So I want to stop here and see what questions people have.
Thank you, Professor Fruzzetti. Next question to you, Professor Perez. You adopted collaborative ethnography with the Dalit women you researched on. So we'd like to know why is collaborative ethnography significant to feminist ethnography? If you could answer that.
Okay, thank you. It's a very interesting question. Also, it will be a little bit difficult to synthesize my perspectives on it, and it might be Lina's and my next book, indeed, written together, right, Lina?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll try to synthesize to the best of my capacities a question that indeed it's, to me, much more complex that well, possibly other questions that you would raise regarding the methodology that I adopted in the field working with Dalit women. Well, first of all, collaborative anthropology or collaborative ethnography or collaborative research risks at being a buzzword. So we know that there is a growing literature that details the collaborative process. But even here, researchers rarely talk about creating methodologies or theories of collaboration. Yet, I believe that theories can actively create and advance participatory methodologies while resisting widespread, those buzzword uses of the term collaboration and creating more space for the yet under-legitimized and under-analyzed collaborative practices. To me, collaborative research demands a closer consideration of how forms and trajectories of knowledge production and dissemination can be challenged and reconstituted across the borders of the normative academic knowledge. Why collaborative anthropology then? If the more I read about what I wrote, the more I write about I experience, the more questions I have. But why collaborative anthropology? And I am pretty sure that this is the approach. So the ethnographic experience, as we know, has long implied a distance and an hierarchy that has constituted the core of the ethnographic authority. One of the first, and to me, still one of the most profound pleas for something that we could call an intersubjective epistemology embraces the need of breaking these asymmetrical relations in order to produce an anthropological knowledge that will allow women's representations and representations by women. In my fieldwork, I intended to try to make less symmetrical relationship, the relationships between us, by reframing them in terms of advocacy, collaboration, dialogue, and positive engagement with the women the Dalit women whom I encountered and keep encountering in the field. To me, reciprocity, accountability, and co-participation are at the core of what I understand by collaborative research, and collaborative research with women, and in my specific case with Dalit women. So indeed, to me, reciprocity and co-participation that I cannot isolate from accountability can demonstrate why collaboration is not merely a tool to allow me to generate new descriptions about isolated projects. It can indeed operate as a conceptualization of social justice, committed to reshaping the agendas, the processes, the products, and the possibilities embedded in the academic research. Discussions of reciprocity are often limited to suggestions of positionality and potential co-authorship since the inception of a project. However, co-authoring is a limited way, to me, of conceptualizing shared authority, especially when it does not translate into challenging the dominant intellectual practices and paradigms. It is now, to me, it is now necessary to extend and enhance discussions on reciprocity, a word that now I'm using as kind of synonymous for collaboration, by simultaneously linking them to critiques of institutional norms that reproduce our institutional norms, that reproduce usually narrow and hierarchical notions of who counts as an expert producer of knowledge. Now, collaborative research and feminism. A reflexive and systematic consideration of the above elements of what I have just mentioned can allow feminist actors, scholars, to undertake a careful conceptualization of collaborative methodologies without undermining the specificity of any given historical, geographical, and political collaboration. In feminist research, we know that positionality has become a critical concept and practice to address questions of that in our book we developed a lot in our introduction, questions of voice, and I would add and authority. The intensification of debates over sisterhood between women across geographic, socio-political, and ethnic borders pushed feminist academics not only to question the power dynamics between the interviewer, interpreter, and interviewer, narrator, if I can say so, but also to pose challenging questions ranging from who can or should write whose history, to what kinds of struggles should research or theory enable? As the politics of voice that, as I just mentioned, Lina and I developed a lot in our introduction, as the politics of voice or voicelessness gain prominence in social sciences and humanities over the last decades, different scholars became concerned with understanding the invisible, everyday places, questioning the role of memory, and I would say revamping older categories of analysis that were deemed relevant to the subjects of anthropology, history, other social sciences and humanities. At the same time, the challenges of feminist theories made researchers extremely cautious about ethnography as both representation and as data about shifting patterns of power relations in, outside the field, and about not imposing their own meanings and organizations onto quote-unquote other people or groups. These trends gave birth to me to exciting new methods that strive to hear silences, something that Lynn and I also wrote about, to read against the grain and ask open-ended questions. So in the field with Dalit women, when I reflect now that in the last few days, I tried to explore the analytical effectiveness of collaboration. How, if at all, has collaborative ethnography the potential to create new spaces for us, women, who imagine and co-author new forms of academic products with those non-academic actors whom academics frequently choose as their subjects or narrators. I'd like to quote, not to quote, but to mention Trouillot, Jean-Rolf Trouillot, an author that I admire, when he mentioned that if the ultimate mark of power is its invisibility, then the ultimate challenge of scholarship is to uncover the roots of power. So through collaborative research, I both try to make visible what for many reasons and at many levels was invisible in the lives of the women I work with, and also to uncover the roots of power, as Trouillot would say. I dealt, of course, with dilemmas of epistemology, power, and privilege, why that I mentioned in my article, while still trying to give space for marginalized Dalit women's interpretive voices and constructions. And what was very, I can't find a word to translate it, but was very at the same time puzzling about it is that they often negotiated these spaces through intense reflection, and I'm not exaggerating, and self-critique by asking me open-ended questions, and more than that, and that was really something I have one day to reflect about, and making the research process visible. Furthermore, my deep concern with accountability resulted in serious discussions of the politics of memory, of power, of place, underscoring how personal narratives are influenced indeed by the social, political, and spatial contexts in which they are recollected, and the unequal relationship between us. Furthermore, this concern with accountability raised critical questions about roles, motives, worldviews, social structures, shifting meanings of time and space, and the silences, and most of all, of the silences that remain between us. So, is there a conclusion for your question now? I would say no. Far from being fixed conclusions or recommended patterns or suggested models, my suggestions are meant to serve as possible points of conversation for feminist scholars who are invested in advancing collaborative theories and methodologies to create new spaces where academics and grassroots actors, and Sreeparna mentioned something similar, actors can push the boundaries of their own institutions to generate knowledge that can inspire new forms of, and I may be not too academic, but I mentioned creative struggle in and outside the academy. I'm not meaning at all that collaborative activism is a collaborative anthropology or ethnography is a form of activism, as Sreeparna also mentioned. Not at all, but we can denounce, we can invite other women to reflect in their own structures and in how power acts upon them. And therefore, we can denounce and help them to denounce patriarchal structures, submission, discrimination, violence, humiliation, that living with Dalit women for a long time and going back to them, even though the Dalit movement in India is now increasingly playing an active role in the Indian politics, is far from being solved. I don't know if I answered your, as I said, it's difficult to synthesize such a problematic and complex matter.
Thank you, Professor Perez. Last question to both the editors, since we have you here. Did you face any challenges in putting this book together? And if yes, if you would want to talk about some of them.
Lina, you want to start?
Oh, I was going to sort of pass on that question. I think some of the challenges we have dealt with in our own individual chapters, that we give a chance for people to actually ask questions. I'm not sure. I did not experience challenges in doing this work with Rosa. I leave it to her if she has any questions, but.
No, I mean, thank you, Lina. Indeed, while we were already used to an extent to collaborate, not all, as I said, not only as colleagues, but as very close friends. We wrote together before, we lectured together at many occasions in different countries. But Lina, we didn't face any challenges, and I think we were very fortunate, because even though two colleagues could not collaborate in the volume, and we would love to have their collaboration, as one is an ethnomusicologist and another one is a linguistic, which would enlarge the scope of this transdisciplinary ethnography. Our contributors were amazing collaborators, and I'd like to thank them, or those who are with us tonight, for their amazing collaboration, coping with all the stages of publishing a book with Routledge, which is well, very, very interesting, but puts us before many barriers that we are not waiting for. So I think the challenges will be those that we wrote in our conclusions. The challenge is to continue to reflect on women's experience through our own experience in the field.
So the only thing I might add is I wonder now if such a book is out, whether we'll see more of writings dealing with exactly the question of women in the field or women, I would like to see more of that, perhaps. That's all.
Can I say something? I'm Vijay Lakshmi from Manipur.
Oh, okay. Yeah, where are you?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yes. Please go ahead, ma'am.
Okay. Yeah, this is me. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, it was very. In fact, when women. It's my just reflection because I have also been like an insider outsider status when I did my field work, and I've been doing my field work. I'm from Delhi and I've been doing my field work in Manipur. And of course, this whole question of objectivity, subjectivity, insider, outsider, I could easily reflect it, when I was doing my field work, in the sense that it was very difficult for me to be an insider because I was from Delhi, and since I married a Manipuri, so to also fulfill the familial role in an alien cultural family, and at the same time to do research and to question the stereotypical notions of a woman's role in the family, which is not even known to you, which is so unknown to you. It was very difficult task for me also, in the sense that I did challenge the stereotypical, notions of a daughter-in-law, because they didn't understand why I have to go to villages, why I have to go to remote areas, what is there? I'm not even getting any salary out of it. So, things like that. So, in fact, I would love to buy this book because it sounds like a reflection of me. Thank you very much.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah, even though you're married to a Manipuri, you still lack that entrance into the community. I like to hear more and more of people having difficulties in the field. You have no idea how many stories I had to hear explaining to people, no, this is not right, this is not right. I'm not a Brahmin daughters from South India, all kinds of stuff.
Right.
But I had to put up with it. And then eventually they said, okay, you can do what you want.
True. Even though my work was... Hanji?
Yeah, please continue.
Yeah, so I'm saying that even though my work was not really personal, in the sense that what I heard from one of the contributors about the domestic violence, must have, the way she explained, also the way she narrated, it was very mind-boggling and disturbing, actually. My work was not like that, in the sense that, I studied state structure from Clifford Geertz' perspective, and it was not very intrinsic to my heart in the sense of personalized. But nevertheless, whenever we do any field work, and if we are intellectually involved, then we are involved. We are personally involved in some way or the other. So, and then the fact that you have to follow certain dress codes, and certain behavior of the left and the right, the impure and the pure. The notions of subtleties in discriminations. All these things you have to really encounter more if you're a woman.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Brara. So, Dr. Chattopadhyay, you wanted to add something to the conversation.
Yeah, so I had just one last thing to say about this whole objectivity versus subjectivity divide. I think I know why you asked me this question, because I think in the curriculum also, there's so much of emphasis when we learn research methods, regardless of which discipline you come from within the social sciences, and leaving economics aside, but whether it's sociology, anthropology, political science, there is a huge emphasis on, putting aside what you personally think and your biases. Now, putting aside your biases is not the same thing as necessarily, being objective, because I think that you can put your bias aside and still be rigorous. But this idea that you must empty yourself of all emotions and of feelings and of all thoughts when you're writing up your research output is actually a little bit, I think, misplaced. And what I would say is that, early on in our careers, I'm sort of, I've reached a point where I'm not a young researcher anymore. There is a lot of pressure to publish in certain venues where these alternative forms of writing, which, this book encourages researchers to engage in, may not be possible. So strategically, if you think of your work as having these different kinds of outputs that you may, I mean, this is sort of, I suppose, unsolicited advice to early career researchers, but it is this, that when you have your research data with you, you might think of different venues for the different kinds of outputs that you do. So if there are platforms or journals or books which, are inviting you to write in this different way that is encouraged in transdisciplinary ethnography in India, that's great. But if you do need to publish in ways that, in venues where this is not the case, then I would say keep your notes, keep those things aside. And once you get to a point where you can, do it. Because I think if enough people push back, the what Rosa and Lina have been talking about, the institutionalized hierarchy of writing and narration that we have will change, but it will take time. So hopefully more books will, pave the way for this kind of work.
I think there's a question related to this in the chat box from Anshu Kumari, that what would be your suggestions for future women researchers? So if any of you would want to respond to this.
Sorry, I didn't repeat.
Yeah, the question is, what are your suggestions for future women researchers?
Your suggestions?
Well, I'll just take a stab at it very short. My earlier work was it fits into what we would call classical anthropology work. The first 3 or 4 texts were really about that topic. And then years later, on just hearing a comment at the railway station, I think it was 2000, somebody said, that work you've done in India on marriages is now completely off. Of course, it was a hyperbole, one of those sentences, but it piqued your interest. And I said, okay, let me see if this guy is right or not. And it took me into an area of research that was basically on violence, domestic, violence that's created out of marriages that cross religious or caste boundaries. So this would not have really happened all of a sudden for me. It just came, and that spent maybe 8-9 years doing that study. I needed a lot more patience doing that than going to watch, marriage rituals, for example, or talking about orphans in Calcutta. So I would say that, depending on your interests, you let the field itself also inform you of what else, in addition to what you're doing, what else is needed, what else needs to be done, what else needs to be studied. I think that's also an important to let the community you're faced with to inform you. They're not really dictating, you need to do this, drop what you're doing. No, in addition to what you're doing, think about maybe a study on A, B, or C. Sometimes we don't know what are the issues that afflict them. that need to be addressed, that need to sort of come out into the surface. And so to have a good ear and to pay attention to what people are telling you, especially women, I think that's the, to me, that's the indication of what to do, what to pay attention to.
Are there any other questions from the audience? Yes, Jack, you can switch on your mic and ask the question.
Hi, my name is Jack. I'm a student of Dr. Fruzzetti, and I had a question. So one of the things in anthropology we talk about is the concept of thick description, and how that is a part of ethnography as well as other forms of qualitative research within sociology, etc. And so I was interested. Dr. Sreeparna mentioned that she likes to let her qualitative data marinate, and I was curious to kind of hear about how does, as researchers, your own interpretations and definitions of thick descriptions change within when you're doing the fieldwork itself, throughout the process of the beginning to end of fieldwork, and then when you're writing it up. How does your own definition of thick description, because it's very contentious in anthropology, the definition of it, how has it kind of changed throughout your own work?
So I think that, thick description is, again, it's not just the note of your observation, right? So what comes through in the thick description in the technical sense might seem you're writing exactly what you're seeing. It's like a visual, it's like a textual photograph in some sense, but it's much more than that, because at least for my own writing, I think that, over the years, the way in which I have, even from the time that you write, and I talk about this in my essay as well, when I was writing my field notes, and I took extensive field notes, and when I came back to Providence and I was going through them, and they just assume that what was familiar did become a little strange in a few months, because the first experience of fieldwork is very visceral. You are there and you feel everything. And then 3 months later, 6 months later, some of those edges have dulled a little. They haven't gone away. Your memories have not faded, but it's a little, it may have dulled. So catching, those feelings and those sort of not only what you're seeing, but how you're responding to the situation as well, and being very self-reflexive at the time when you're doing field work, I think is as important as sort of looking back at your data and then looking at that differently. And I think life experiences have a lot to do with it as well, because, if you have gone through a situation where you're now able to empathize in a very real way because you understand some of the things better, I think that also can alter the way in which you interpret the data. Your thick description as it is may not change, but your interpretation of your thick description will.
We have Dr. Hia Sen, who has also contributed a chapter to this book, and she has a question.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sreeparna. And it is so great to see you, Lina, Nakosh, and you, Rosa Maria. I had a question because the volume took quite a few years, and it was to borrow from Sreeparna's term, marinating for a while. And this is something I wondered, because when Lina first told us about the plan for something like this, I believe there was a workshop happening at Gandhinagar, which I was not a part of. I think a couple of other contributors were not a part of. So there was not really a chance to know or get to meet all of the contributors. So I always wondered, and especially when the volume finally came out, that of course the diversity of our disciplinary positions, as well as the other kind of diversity that we brought in, being who we were, was a payoff. But what did the editors have in mind when they brought together exactly this motley crew of contributors? That was one. And second, and I was thinking that something which Sreeparna said was very, very important. When some of us started fieldwork, we were relatively young. So what, and even, I mean, even retrospect has its lifespan, right? So when you're exercising retrospection 2 years after completing fieldwork, it's very different as when life happens to you some 10 years down the line and you look back at it very differently. And I remember Lina talking about Bishnupur and her experiences of even being present at a childbirth with hot towels, if I'm not mistaken, and very different kinds of, very different degrees of intensity and involvement with the field as compared to some of us who maybe moved out of that field and moved on to something else down the line. So was that a concern with the editors when they were kind of looking at the final version, like very different degrees of engagement or very different sense of what it meant to them in terms of reflecting on women in the field? And also because a lot of us were not trained as anthropologists, but were in adjacent disciplines. So maybe even how we read the concept note might have been very different. So primarily this, what made you bring us together, and were there concerns about giving the edited volume coherence, you know? That is all.
Rosa?
Lina,
Well,
I can, maybe we can share the question. Okay. Well, when we organized the workshop, I think we called it workshop, Women in the Field, just Women in the Field. When we organized it, we invited indeed other colleagues that did not collaborate, could not collaborate in the volume for different reasons. And we decided to include other colleagues that we indeed were not in Ahmedabad at that time, and we could not invite them to join the workshop. Indeed, we invite some colleagues from other places of India, but not from other parts of the world. But the idea of a transdisciplinary book, of course, it is not an orthodox one. Both of us are anthropologists, and indeed, our first intention would be to put together a group of anthropologists reflecting on their own experiences. But we felt that to broaden up the debate, to include other reflections by other women from other disciplines would be important. And also, even though ethnography, and we all know that is at the core of the anthropological methodology, now other disciplines start using the term fieldwork, ethnography. Our first idea, first of all, we wanted to put together women working in India, non-Indian women, and to reflect about their experiences. And further on, even because we have colleagues from other disciplines, women colleagues, we decide to broaden up the scope and include other disciplines. And to this day, I don't know what you feel in, but I think that it was a good decision because, of course, there are many things in common between all of us. And at the end of the day, when I ask myself, could we achieve some homogeneous nature in this book? I would think so. Well, that was the case. That was the beginning. We were teaching a course together, and then it was about women and gender and right, Lina, and then why not to organize something? And
the course we're teaching was of gender and nationalism in India. Exactly. And the idea came up with doing a book together about this topic, about the topic of fieldwork. And in the initial group, half of them did not follow up. And perhaps this was a challenge to go after them. Perhaps the time they didn't have the time or the energy to contribute a chapter. So having other than anthropologists, I thought it enriched the volume. Like Sreeparna talked about thick description to answer Jack Otero's question. See, there are more people talking about that article of Cliff Geertz than anthropologists are actually doing work with it. So, if you pick up a book on my English department, you find a lot of them referring to particularly that article of Cliff Geertz's work. And some of us have moved on because there are, it's not all about that kind of thick description. It's about something else. Sometimes you go beyond the thick description. So it took a long time because managing all these different papers was perhaps the challenge, but we were very patient, both of us. I would do the work, I'd send it to her, she will redo my work, send it back, and it worked in the end. I think it's a great piece of work, and I think the articles are a testament to some of the work that some of us have gone through, and I don't know. I just think it's going to be a very important volume.
Can I just add a detail to what Lina said about some colleagues who are not anthropologists mentioning some authors, some anthropologists more than us anthropologists. When we were preparing the index, which was a nightmare because at the end of the book, when the book was finished, Rutledge said, wow, what about the index? And when we went through the index, if you go through the index, it's very interesting to observe how the different fields cross over through some categories. There are terms that, for example, we don't use in anthropologists don't use in our papers, but then our colleagues from literary studies or other disciplines or historians use. It's very interesting how indeed it mixed up so well for me and for Lina, to me and to Lina, in our opinion.
Akush?
Thank you very much.
Akush has a question.
The macro is...
You're muted.
I realized that. Yes, thanks for including me. It brought back a lot of memories and a lot of travail that brings back, what we all went through in different ways. And I had also a question for the editors, for Lina and Rosa, that given in my experience, a work like this is harder than writing your own work. And often thankless at the same time. There is a lot of legwork involved that you don't have to do when you work on your own book. And given also that it has brought out so many responses and the initiative has been followed or is being followed by so many, it will certainly stand up to what you guys expected or hoped that it would be a worthy successor to get to that Peggy Gold book. And it does seem to me that it is well on the way to do that. Now, given that it is hard to pull all this off, and you've done it before, are you up to doing more along these lines in the future, or this is it, and let the pieces fall and let where they go and let the people who listen follow in their way?
Of course, are you asking Lina and I? If
yes,
you are, the answer is yes, we are. But of course, we would also have other colleagues. We are very excited to go on always.
And then what
have different topics, but of course we would love that other colleagues would start other trends of reflection, and yes.
No, but is there something in the kitty, as it were? Is there something gestating or planned or?
We are, I think, thinking of, Rosa, go ahead, sorry.
No, well, after finishing the book, there are topics that, well, this is the hidden, the visible part of the book. It's, you have reviewers and the book goes back and forward and they give different suggestions. And then these suggestions may lead us to think again of other possibilities. And one of the topics that we liked was about voices, power, voice and silence. And so there are a few topics that we would love to pursue. But sorry, Lina, this is one of them. I don't want to disclose all our secrets.
No. The voice
I'm joking.
So the voice is something that we've agreed to do, and in the 2013 book that I worked on, questions of violence, I used the voice there a lot more than what I sort of interpret and describe what some of the women are trying to tell me about what they had endured. So the voice, I think, it's going to be a very strong and powerful text to work on. We are starting these in June or July, in case you didn't know, Rosa.
Well, we have historians here like João, we have me, and of course, the voices of the archives are also very important to us, or the silences of the archive.
Betty?
I think there are a few questions in the chat box as well. There is a question from Veera. She is asking that being a female researcher who has been working ethnographically in North India for a decade, your reflections really resonate with my own experiences and help me rethink about my own practice. Her question is that you've highlighted very nicely and productively the ways in which the gender perspective help give visibility to layered struggles of marginalized individuals. She would love to hear more on it, about how it might also unpack and be relatable to powerful individuals in different ways. And she also has a suggestion for a next volume on women researching powerful men. So if any of you would want to respond.
Rosa, let me start. I want to touch on the question of marginality, working with women, and answering the question of marginality, if I'm correct, at how she has voiced that. Yes, especially in the first 10, 15 years of my work in Bengal, I was looking at women in the field through trying to understand the construction of gender through ritual and kinship. And then eventually, you know, if you read the literature that was available at that time, it wasn't really looking at the potential strong sort of female presence in Bengal, which is crazy because as it is, they're quite strong and very powerful. So I was looking at what supposedly was the marginal perspective of women, but I was looking at it myself as a marginal person, but not gender-based, racial-based. And so it added a new dimension to how I was looking and addressing or trying to decipher what was in front of me. That I was already coming with a baggage of what I've experienced in different parts of the world, in the Sudan, in Eritrea, in the US, constant forms of discrimination that I think made me a strong person to be able to address the issue without saying, yes, you are discriminated, but let people talk about how they see themselves in society.
Ines, would you want to add something to this since you talk about gender?
Yeah, in fact, I've never worked particularly on marginalized groups, but I think my research could show some hidden power, female power. So as I said in the beginning, when I started research this community, I found out that it's very interesting that since there were not male priests among this community, women were replacing them. And the women who were replacing them, in fact, they were widows from Brahmin priests, but Brahmin that have never exercised religious rituals. So they had some books and they learned by their own, and they started to replace men, and they started to perform rituals which are specifically male oriented. So by doing this, they constructed a very strong, powerful leadership roles among their community. And but on the other side, which was very puzzling for me, is that they were corroborating patriarchal notions in the same, on the other hand, they were developing some spheres of power, but reproducing patriarchal notions. So at the same time, they acquired this new status. They said that, well, if a male priest comes, we leave this work. But as time was going on, and I think this is what is very advantageous, is to have a field work near your place here in Portugal, is that you can see what happens through the years. And as this community was able to pay for pujari, a fixed pujari in the temple, I thought, well, let's see if the women leave the work again to the pujari. And in fact, it didn't happen. When this pujari came, great tension was created between women and men. So although in some time these women saw themselves only temporarily replacing men, the truth is with time they wanted this power for them, this leadership role. So in some way, my research also gave some visibility to this very complex, this is a very complex reality, gender reality, of what can be considered marginalized, of course, in a gender very male-oriented community.
Right. So there is one last question from Ruchita. You want to ask a question, Ruchita?
Betty raised her hand, I think.
Yes. I thought Lina called my name, and I had a question that was a bit convoluted, and I didn't put it in the chat, and I can talk about part of it. And I will say that I do teach a methods course, the Anthropology of Communities, where I have students go out and do active field research. And what I'm going to do the next time I teach it is to play this YouTube video and also have some articles from the volume incorporated into the course. I haven't worked in India, but I've worked in Southern Africa. And of course, through Lina, I had more exposure to anthropological literature on India. And I'll mention that when I came to Brown, Lina had recently designed and had funded a course, Colonialism in Africa. And so I do have, I want to go back past Geertz to, and thick description to Malinowski, because in my research in Eswatini, formerly Swaziland, he was the anthropologist who facilitated Hilda Cooper's work, and she's been featured in some of the volumes on field research. He facilitated her research in Swaziland, and by introducing her to the king of Swaziland, King Sobhuza, at a conference. And for years, she did research on Swaziland. And despite the fact that Swazi customary law is not codified, certainly she codified a philosophy of colonialism and immediate post-colonialism. And what happened in the process is that males have been so privileged that even now, when there have been protests in Swaziland and efforts to overthrow the current king, women's voices have been silenced. And I'm doing some writing on Swaziland now, and I'm always, because of social media, as you're using it here to promote doing sociology, there are all sorts of panels on the future of Eswatini. And there has never been any articulation of a plan for women in the new, if there is a new dispensation. And so there's a sort of voicelessness there. But I also want to mention as another aspect of it, when I was a Fulbright in Swaziland in the late 80s, there was no anthropology department. So despite Hilda Cooper's presence and a number of her students also did research there, there's never been an anthropology department. I guess I would ask a question in this long convoluted process about whether the fact that your volume is interdisciplinary sort of took it away from this colonial history, this colonial heritage of ethnography as it exists in anthropology.
Wow, Mary, I should never have graduated you.
Oh, Lina.
A tough question. We actually, it's not, Rosa, you want to take a stab at it?
I don't know if I'm sorry, Betty, I don't know if I fully understood you, because I'm receiving this message that my internet is unstable and sometimes I can't follow, but
I'll explain it to you, Rosa. It's about whether our volume really addressed the colonial heritage of ethnography and doing field work, basically.
I think that indirectly it does. It's quite inevitable that it does, even it's not explicit. I would rather instead I would suggest that it is more about decolonizing, even though now the term is very updated, decolonizing methodologies, decolonizing ethnographical knowledge. But of course, working in India, all of us, being or not of Indian origin, we are pretty much sensitive to the colonial, not from only an anthropological perspective, but from an historical perspective, that we are dealing with a field that was the colony, with all these the implications that it has. But if I had to choose a term to synthesize better, I think I would rather use the term to decolonize or decolonization of our colonial heritage as anthropologists.
But in fact, we are addressing some of those issues. Look, it's a volume of, if it's a volume about field work, but it's also a volume about women doing the work. We purposely did not solicit male anthropologists or other social scientists and humanities people to join us, because it had a particular purpose. So if we are talking about the voice of the absence of voices for women, in itself, we have actually challenging the field, challenging the dictates of what's been published so far. minus a very powerful voice of women. So we are not exactly talking about colonialism, but in our next volume of Voice, we will definitely remember to include aspects of the volume on questions of decolonizing. What we did actually wasn't quite decolonizing, but we dealt with a period that has already gone past that.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, it's not gone. It's not an old concept. Right now, if you look at every campus in the US, I mean, the question is how to decolonize departments, the campus. So it has taken a new life in the US today.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you. There's a long question. Do we have more time for a question, Dipali?
Hi, I would like to ask something.
Okay, where are you?
We can take that question from Ruchita.
Yes, hi guys. So my question is for Rosa, Sreeparna, and Lina. So my formal training is not as an anthropologist or sociologist. I'm an undergrad student. I'm in my last semester, and I'm pursuing design, human-centered design, and I will soon be working with informal Dalit settlements. And this is the first time that I will be trying out methods with the communities in attempt to, understand something. And I would also love to discuss this and, have like an ongoing exchange with you guys via email, hopefully. And right now, I just wanted to know like anything that you want to kind of share, which might guide or help me. Yeah. Pretty much that.
Yeah, very interesting comments. I was just reading one by Nassif, two by Nassif, master students, but unfortunately, we won't have time to respond now. Yeah, I just looked at the chat, and thank you, Nassif, for your questions and for your comments. And there are other interesting comments. Well, I think I may have to leave because the internet is blinking.
Sreeparna,
sorry, Ruchita, I don't understand what exactly are you going to be doing?
So we're working with Shreyas in that Bidar project, and basically they have like a Buddha Vihar in the settlement. So I'm trying to kind of unpack the idea of what a library could be, or like what an Adhyay Kendra could be, along with the communities. So there are few methods that we've worked on that we would like to try. Yeah.
Right. So I think, I mean, if you're going to already the group that you're involved with does a lot of participatory action research, right? So the methods that you will use, see, in terms of understanding what the demand for a library is something that has possibly come from the community, is what I'm guessing. So if that is the case, then what the meaning of the library and what it could constitute is something that I assume would be, collaborative, you would plan it with the community. So I don't think that structured tools that you are taught in standard research methods course, where you go with like a pencil and a form doing a basic needs assessment or things like that is going to quite work. Because you're already working in a very complex setting. Having done fieldwork in Bidar, I know that it's not just Dalit. It might you're also dealing with Muslim populations. You're dealing with political turmoil with regards to what's happening in Karnataka right now. So it is a very challenging time to be doing what you're doing. So I would definitely take account of the current political context within which you are working, and then move very carefully in collaboration with the community to arrive at what your methods should be. in terms of, doing this, creating this library, co-creating this library.
Right. Great. That helps. Thank you.
So before we wind up, any final comments by the panelists, if you would want to respond or add anything?
I just want to thank everybody who actually contributed for the making of this volume. It was good work. It wasn't hard. It's something that I'm really happy that it's out. I was more happier than 5 or 6 of my books that came out earlier. This meant something. I mean, I talked more about this volume, and because I think it really sends us a very strong message. And I think we will hear about it in the field and from our colleagues. Rosita, Sreeparna.
Well, I would again reproduce what Lina just said, and I'd like to thank not only to the collaborators and bright collaborators that we have with us tonight, I mean India, like Sreeparna and Ines, but also to other very good friends who are bright scholars and didn't have the opportunity to raise questions, like Sandra Lobo. I think Luchita Pania would like to talk to her sometimes. She's an amazing historian. And João Telzi Cunha, and also my very dear friend Nuno, who is doing a very, very complex research about India, being an architect. And so hopefully we will get in touch sometime, somewhere, and we can develop many questions that we could not reply to tonight. And thank you to the organizers for putting all of us together in this wonderful debate. And thank you, Lina, for being patient, for being what you are, not only patient, for all that you are.
Dito. Same here. Thanks a lot. Thank you, especially to Rituparna and Dipali. Good work. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. I know some questions have been left semi-answered. So because we are winding up due to it being already a long event and everyone has other work to get to, if any questions you have, you can feel free to write to the editors or the other contributors. Thank you once again for joining today, and the recording will soon be uploaded to our blog. So in case you want to listen to it again, it will be there. So thank you once again.
Thanks. Bye.